Hi, my name's Alexa, and I'm better known on trail as Bonsai, and I just hiked the Pacific Crest Trail this year, and I was going to talk a little bit about some of my gear. I did also post an article on my author page about the gear that I brought with me on the trail and some changes that we made. So I'm going to be talking more about like my sleep system and the pack and some of the bigger items that I had, and less about my clothing and smaller items. So if you're interested in looking into that information, you can just go onto my author page and find that information there. But so I hiked the trail with my partner, and we had a lot of gear that we decided to share. So specifically, we both slept in one tent. We had a 2-person quilt, and we shared our cook system and our battery. And for a little bit, we were also sharing our water filtration system. So his pack, he carried a Osprey Bolt 75, and he really liked his pack because he said it was incredibly comfortable. It didn't ventilate very well because it's not, unlike a lot of the other Osprey packs, it doesn't really like lay off of your back. But otherwise, it was extremely comfortable, and it was really nice because we never had to worry about not having enough space to carry everything that we needed. So like in the Sierras, when we had to carry bear vaults, it was really easy for him to stuff the bear vault into here and still be able to carry everything else that he had with him. For my pack, I carried the REI Flash 52, which I really don't recommend for a thru hike. I really love REI's products, and I think they have a lot of great things and a lot of great qualities to their products, but with the REI Flash specifically, I had a lot of issues with getting the hip belt to stay cinched. So at one point, after about 1,300 miles, the hip belt would become uncinched every 5 minutes, so I'd be walking and literally hoisting it up and re-cinching my hip belt. So needless to say, at the end of the hike, I was really glad to not be wearing this anymore. The features that I did really like about it is it does have a separate entrance into the bottom of the pack at down here, and then it has these straps to hold like a sleeping pad. And it did have a lot of pockets, so it was really easy for me to keep things really well organized. Other features that I didn't like about it was that the pockets on the hip belt were really small, so I could really only hold like a lighter, and I had this little tiny knife that was like no bigger than my pinky. So after about 400 miles, I decided to start wearing a fanny pack to help carry like my phone and some snacks and things like that, and that really helped a lot. It was like a really cheap pack. I only spent 20 bucks on it, so I definitely got my money's worth considering it got me all the way from Mexico to Canada. But I wouldn't recommend the REI Flash for a long distance hike. Next, I'll talk about our cook system. So like I said, my partner and I shared our cook system, and we started with, it's called the Optimus Crux, which is a lot like a pocket rocket. It's just this little thing that pops open so that you can rest a pot on top of it, and you screw it in to a fuel canister. And what I liked about this one was that it really worked on any fuel canister, whereas some people that we were with, theirs wouldn't work on like a Coleman brand one or a Jetboil brand one, but we could use any one that we wanted. And we originally had these titanium pots that we used, and they kind of like folded into each other so that you could put a small fuel canister inside and maybe a fork or something, and this actual stove portion. But we decided to ditch that at Mount Laguna and send it home. And instead, our friend who was hiker boxing his gave us his Sea to Summit X kettle, which we really liked. As you can see, it's collapsible, so it's really easy to carry with you in your pack. It holds up really well. We had it with us for the majority of the trail, and it was the perfect size for 2 people. It is a little big if you're by yourself, but you never know how hungry you're gonna get, so it was actually really nice to have the extra capacity. Neither one of us drank hot coffee or hot tea, so that wasn't an issue for us. If you do like to have hot drinks though, this is probably not a good thing to have because you can't drink out of the silicone side. And the lid, so this is actually a replacement one. Sea to Summit sent us a free one to replace the one that we had because some mice had bitten some holes into the side, which it leaked pretty slowly, but it still held up pretty well. And then also the lid cracked after just a couple hundred miles, and we had to just throw it out. So it did take us a while to boil things because we didn't have a lid with us, but I mean, ultimately it worked pretty well, and we were pretty satisfied with it too. As far as our water filtration system goes, so We started with a Sawyer squeeze and we only carried one with us, which in hindsight was kind of a silly thing because often when we weren't hiking together, it was really hard for one of us to be able to get water and we just had to like sit and wait for the other person. When we got to Casa de Luna, which is somewhere around mile 430 or 450, we decided to switch to Aquamira. It's only $14 for the two little containers that you need, which is a little pricey if you're using it often, which of course you are when you're hiking 2,650 miles. And also it leaves a really weird lemon taste that we just couldn't really get over. And so after a couple hundred miles, once we ran out of that, we just switched to bleach. Bleach was a little weird because you're constantly drinking bleached water, but it was also kind of nice because we didn't have to think much about it and we could each carry our own bleach. And it's mostly free because anytime we'd go into town, we'd just go to a restaurant and ask them if they had any extra bleach that we could fill the container with, and they would usually be okay with it. So we really highly recommend bleach. It was easy to carry, it was light, it was pretty cheap, and it worked really well, and we didn't have to sit there filtering out of a Sawyer squeeze, which can get kind of monotonous and obnoxious after a long period of time. And one of the last smaller pieces of shared gear that we had is we carried an Anchor rechargeable battery. So we carried a really big one. We have an absurdly large battery compared to a lot of people. This has 6 full charges to it, and we never wore the battery down. So especially on trails where you're getting into towns very frequently, like the Appalachian Trail, I would recommend a smaller one, even if you're hiking with 2 people, because they're really easy to recharge. They last a really long time, and the large one is pretty heavy. It's a little over a pound. But for us, I really liked this. It was only $40, so as far as like a rechargeable battery goes, this was like a perfect price. It lasted us the entire trail, and we still use it nearly every day, especially as we're traveling. Okay, so as far as our sleep system goes, one thing that we sadly sacrificed was a lot of comfort within our sleep system when we were first starting out. We were on a really tight budget, so we just kind of went with the cheapest things we could find, and then went out on the trail and discovered that buying the cheapest things are not always the best things to do. I didn't sleep. I could not sleep through the night for the first 1,300 miles until I switched my sleeping pad, and at that point, that's when I finally started to sleep a lot better. So when we both started out, we were sleeping with these Thermarest Z pads. The one thing that I do really like about these is that they're so lightweight and they're really versatile, so having one to just sit around at, like when you're at a water spot or at lunch, was really nice. And then also because I practice yoga, it was really nice to have as a yoga mat. But this is pretty used. We've had this now for probably about 2 years, and it's pretty thin. We would double ours up when we slept and lay on it that way in hopes that it would make it just a little bit more padded, but it still wasn't really comfortable. My partner Bighorn used his the entire trail, and he did have complaints about it, but I think ultimately it was an okay thing considering the price. For just we paid $36 for ours. I was able to switch to the Thermarest Pro Light, which I really, really liked a lot. It's pretty thin, and I am a side sleeper, and I didn't have any problems with my hips hurting at all. And I do have the shorter size because I am only 5'4", so I'm a little short. But this was the perfect size for me. I always put my pack at the bottom of my feet so I can elevate my feet at night, and I had no problems with being able to do that and like sleep comfortably on this. It's pretty durable. I didn't have any issues with holes. Granted, I only had it for half the trail, and I know a lot of other people had holes in theirs just after about half of the trail. And another feature that you may like, I didn't really use it, but if you open this up and just put a couple blows into it, it will auto-inflate, which was kind of nice if you just really wanted to just throw it in there and not deal with it so you could cook dinner for yourself. Another thing that I added to my system that was a really big help was a Thermarest compressible pillow. So I have the small and Bighorn had the large, and he started with his, and he really loved it, and I was pretty jealous the entire time. I would actually use his whenever he wasn't in the sleeping bag because I was really uncomfortable. What I did for the first half of the trail was I would just stuff my jacket into like a stuff sack and use it that way, and it was okay. I always had a lot of neck pain. But when we got to Bend, I switched to the small one, and this was only $20, and it's really compressible, which was super nice. So it was able to really get down in size and then stuff it into your pack and keep it in a pretty small size with being able to keep everything else in there as well. I liked that I didn't have to blow it up, and it inflates quite a bit, which is nice too, especially if you leave it out for a while like this. So I highly recommend this, especially if you're kind of wanting to get a little bit more luxuries into your pack. Like, this is a really great product. It's super lightweight, very cheap, and it's just a good thing to have around if you want to be comfortable. I'll talk about our tent now. So we had a different tent that we lost as we were driving out to California to start the trail. So just on a whim, we bought this tent. It was, I think, about 40% off. We got it for $112. It's the Alps Mountaineering Zephyr 2-person tent. One of the main reasons why we wanted this tent was because our last tent only had one door, and you could only really open it on one side. So whenever Bighorn needed to get out of the tent, he was climbing over me, waking me up, and it would just get kind of obnoxious for both of us. We wanted a freestanding tent because our last tent wasn't freestanding, and it just seems to be a lot more simple to have a freestanding tent. So we went with this one. Most of the reason why we went with it was the price. It's really heavy. With everything included in it, it's over 5 pounds, which is not a great tent for backpacking. But we did actually really like the tent despite the weight. We wouldn't bring it with us in the future on a backpacking trip, but it did get us all the way from Mexico to Canada. We did carry a footprint with us because we just wanted to protect the bottom part of our tent to make sure that it wasn't getting any holes in it. And, you know, for how light this is and small, I would recommend having a footprint. A lot of people just used a Tyvek sheet, which I would also probably recommend, but I liked having this with us because when I didn't have my Z-pad, I could just use this to sit on or to lay on or to do yoga on and not have any problems. And also we could wrap up the tent poles in this and connect it to the bottom part of the pack really easily. And the last piece of gear that we shared that I'm going to talk about is actually our favorite piece of gear. So for our sleeping bag, we went with an Enlightened Equipment 2-person quilt. It's called the Accomplice. And this was by far my favorite thing that we bought. It was also the most expensive and the one that took us the longest to decide on, and I'm really glad that we went with this. It's extremely comfortable. We even sleep with it on the bed sometimes just because we love it so much. It has on the back, the foot box is closed, and so it's really nice because this part doesn't kind of flap open and your feet get cold. It is kind of hard when you have 2 people who are sleeping with packs at the bottom of your feet. Some air does get in here, but ultimately it wasn't that big of a problem. And then also here on the back, you can attach, I don't have them with me right now, but there's straps that you can attach here and then wrap these underneath your sleeping pads to keep you nice and warm. I was never cold. There was actually a lot of nights where I was sweating because I was too warm and it was pretty cold outside. It was nice because we didn't have to constantly zip together our sleeping bags so that we could be closer to each other, and if we were cold, we could just curl up with one another. So if you are hiking in a pair, I do recommend this. It's pretty pricey. We spent $420 on ours. The extra money was to get a longer size because my partner's taller than I am. But it was really worth it. It's a great product. It's made in the United States in our hometown of Winona, which is actually pretty cool. And the company is just an awesome company. So yeah, I highly recommend any of Enlightened Equipment's quilts. And it was also super lightweight. It was only 2 pounds, a little over 2 pounds. We did try to split the gear as evenly as we could. So because my partner is so much taller than I am, he carried about 60% of our shared weight and I carried about 40% of our shared weight, and then food we split 50-50. So when we were carrying the quilt, it might seem like it's kind of a problem that you can't just carry your own quilt, but because it's only a little bit over 2 pounds, it was kind of perfect because it wasn't, 2 pounds was what one of our sleeping bags would have weighed on our own. So it was a pretty nice product to have with us. So that's all the gear that we had with us. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Alexa M. Shapiro, or you can send me a comment through my author page or on any of my posted articles. And yeah, good. If you embark on a future long distance hike, best of luck. Thank you.